Well, good morning. Let me extend my welcome to worship here. My name's Adam Hildebrand. I get to be one of the pastors here at LVfirst, and it's such a joy to be with all of you here this morning. So excited to crack open the Bible with all of you guys, talk about a story that's going to sound really familiar, but think about it from a slightly different perspective. Last week, we kicked off this series we're calling Worth It, and we're really asking what has value in our lives and where do we invest our lives? Because as we think about this idea of stewardship, as we think about investing and committing to the life of this church and what we're doing here in this community and right here inside these walls, we got to ask those really deep questions. And here, we don't think that this is just about money. This is our whole life. This is investing everything we have in what God is doing in this place and around the world. Last week, we asked this question: what is the kingdom of God worth? Is it worth it? Is a life lived to the fullest worth it? And what does that look like? A number of years ago, I was sitting in a friend of mine's office with my oldest son, Caleb. He was younger and was having difficulty paying attention in one of his classes at school, and so we took him to go see my friend who was a learning specialist, and he's sitting across the desk from my son, and they're talking, and I'm seated behind him, looking at the two of them having this conversation. And the first thing my friend asked Caleb was this fascinating question. He said to him, "What's the first thing you noticed when you walked in my office?" And Caleb, without hesitating, said the thing that was going through my head at the same time. He said, "The ticking clock right over there." It was the first thing that I had noticed when I walked in the room. It was the first thing that I heard. It was the first thing that started to bore a hole in my head as I heard the tick, 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 tick of that clock. The tick-tock of the clock was painful, all sane and logical. All my Gen X friends are like, "I know that song." But Caleb said it, I thought it. And I think the part of the reason that I noticed the clock so much that day was that I didn't feel like I had the time to be there in that meeting. You know, Michelle had asked me to go and to take him and to be a part of this meeting, but I heard that clock and I could hear the seconds ticking by, and I kept thinking to myself, like, I've got so many other places to go. I've got so many other things I need to do. I don't need to be here with this clock ticking and talking and driving me crazy. I'm supposed to be there with my son who's getting help from my friend, and here I am only thinking about the time that's ticking by. I was supposed to be listening to what my son was saying, but all I could hear was that clock rattling off the minutes that I wasn't doing the other things that I thought were so very, very important. I was there instead of the places that I felt like I needed to be, doing the thing that I felt like I needed to be doing. It's the passage of time, and I just didn't have time for it. Time is a funny thing, isn't it? Like, we talk about time in these really interesting ways, and frequently we use monetary terms to describe time, right? Like, when we say that we want more time, we'll say, "I'll try to make time," as if that's a thing that we can do. Right? Time is a finite resource. We can't make more of it. We can adjust the way that we utilize it, but we can't make more time. Or when we talk about time, sometimes we'll say things like, how I'm going to spend time, as if it has a dollar amount. Or we say things like, time is money. Or that we're going to invest time. Or that the time that we haven't invested in some other place we describe as free time, as if it doesn't cost anything or it's not being utilized in a certain way. But time is a thing that we can't get back. And it may be the most valuable resource that we have because it's the most limited resource that we have. And if I was being honest, which I will be, Most of my greatest regrets involve me not being intentional about my time, about where I'm utilizing my time, about where my time is being used in certain ways. Oftentimes, I'm moving at such a quick pace, I'm thinking about something else, that I don't take the time that's necessary to really listen, to really focus, to really see unique moments and opportunities. Most often, this happens with my family, where I just cruised on by and dropped a truth bomb and then just kept on going because I had places to be and things to do, and I didn't stop and take the time to really listen and hear what was going on. Didn't take the time. So what's time worth? Like, what is it worth investing our time in? What is it worth spending our time on? I saw this fascinating TED Talk recently by a guy named Dino Ambrosi, who runs an organization called Project Reboot, and he helps our young people, and probably the rest of us, think about time in a certain way. And he uses this chart right here to help us think about that. He talks about time in terms of these bubbles, and each and every one of these bubbles represents a month of our lives. And this is if we were an 18-year-old, assuming that we have a life expectancy of 90 years old. And each bubble represents a month of our life, and each line represents 36 months or 3 years of our lives. So this is a whole life from 18 to 90 for our current young people who are 18. And then he begins to unpack what each of those lines tends to be. That's what these color codes are on here. Each row represents kind of 3 years of your life, and about a third of your time is going to be spent sleeping. 288 months. For some of you, it's more. For some of you, it's less. But that's on average, 288 months. Some of you really like sleep, and that's okay. The next set of bubbles, the green dots, are on average work and school. Some of you work a lot more than that. Some of you work a lot less than that. That's okay. That's average, 126 months committed to your career. You'll spend, on average, 18 months of your life driving. All of you carpool moms are like, it's way more than that. I spend so much time in the car. Let's see here. You'll spend 36 months of your life cooking and eating, which is an important thing to do. And then you'll spend 36 months as well on chores and errands. Chores and errands, things that we have to do. And then you'll spend about 27 months of your life in the bathroom, give or take. Which leaves these two blocks at the bottom, the black circles and the white circles at the bottom here. This is your free time. Assuming this life expectancy, this is your free time. 334 months of free time. So that's all, nights, weekends. This is like an old cell phone company, free nights and weekends, things like that. So 334 months of your life is kind of up to you, optimistically, for all the other pursuits in your life, like your bucket list items, pursuing your passions, traveling the world, leaving your mark, making a difference. And how that time is spent will determine the quality and quantity of your life. Now, here's where this gets serious. The black dots, considering an 18-year-old and their current use of screens, represents our 18-year-olds' pace and how they'll use so many of those dots, so many of those months. 93% of their remaining free time will be spent looking at a screen. 26 years of their lives with TikTok, Netflix, Instagram, and YouTube. Now, I know we all want to kind of pound on them and be like, kids are addicted to screens. Where do you think they learned that from? They learned that from us. They learned that from us in those moments where we should take the time to look at them, but instead we got an email that we feel like we need to look at. Or we're in the middle of watching a video about some random thing that we didn't know that we needed to learn about, but now it's on our screen, so we feel like we got to learn about it. And we're like, wait, just a minute, just a minute, just a minute. We taught them that. 26 years of their lives. Now, these are all averages, but when we think about the difference between the people who make a difference and those who want to make a difference, it's generally a difference of this time. And time tells us a whole lot about our priorities and our distractions. And where you spend your time reveals what you really value. Jesus tells a story about what really matters in Luke chapter 10. It's a story that's so incredibly familiar to us. It's one that we've heard time and time again. But if we're honest, this is really a story about time. It's in Luke chapter 10, starts in verse 25. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan, but I want you to hear it with new ears this morning if you're familiar with it. If you're not familiar with it, then great, you're going to hear it for the first time. It goes like this. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus, because that's what lawyers do. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Teacher, Jesus, what do I need to do in order to have more dots? What do I need to do in order to have all the dots? Dots that go on forever. What must I do to have eternal life? Life forever, outside of time. Like, what must I do to beat time so that it doesn't have the impact on my life that I see it have on everybody else's life? What must I do to have the fullest possible life? What must I do to inherit eternal life? This is the question that the lawyer asks to Jesus. And Jesus, being Jesus, puts it back on him. What's written in the law? I mean, you're a lawyer. How do you read it? And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." The lawyer answers that really we're stewarding this life, and what we do with it matters. All of it. Where we spend our time, our resources, our focus, attention, everything, the way that we invest in our neighbors, all of it matters. And Jesus said to him, "Great job. Number one answer, ding, 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 ding. You got it. You're right in what you said. Go and do this, and you will live. Go and do this, and you'll live fully. You'll have a great life. Your life will be so full, and you'll live. That life will last through eternity. You'll have that. Just go and do that." But the scriptures say, wanting to justify himself, wanting to make sure that he got it right, wanting to make sure he was spending the right time in the right places, wanting to make sure that he knew exactly what was required of him so that he could just do what was required of him so that he could make sure that he got in, but just didn't, you don't want to do too much, right? You want to get an A, but not like the highest A, because then you did extra effort for no reason. He says, what do I got to do to get a passing grade here? And he asked this question. Who is my neighbor? Jesus, who exactly, when you say my neighbor, who do you mean? Because I don't know, have you met my neighbor? Jesus? Because my neighbor, they can be a lot, right? They can take up a lot of my time. They can they can just go on and on and on, and they can, they require a lot of me. And Jesus, I just want to know who's my neighbor. Who do I have to actually love in that way? Because I want to make sure I utilize the time that I have in the right way. And sometimes when I'm going to the mailbox and I just want to get the mail and go back inside, and my neighbor wants to talk and talk and talk. I just don't have time for that, Jesus. So which neighbor are we talking about? Which neighbor are we referring to? Who exactly is my neighbor? So Jesus jumps into this story. He replied to him and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So this is important. He was leaving Jerusalem, presumably for a worship experience, and going down towards Jericho, and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him and left him half dead. Now by chance, Jesus says, now by chance, a priest was going down that same road. Yay, a priest. A holy man, he's going to do something. He's going to help out. This priest who had just come from temple worship, he had just come from helping people sacrifice at the temple. This priest was going down that same road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. He passed by on the other side. And this familiar refrain begins to happen in this story. The priest comes, he sees, and he passes by. Now, all sorts of reasons have been proposed for why this priest didn't do what he probably should have done and helped this guy, or at least checked on this guy, or at least had a conversation with this guy, or checked the pulse of this guy. You know, a lot of people say, well, he's a priest, and so he couldn't touch a dead body. By Jewish law, he would be unclean, and then he wouldn't be able to go to temple worship. But he had just finished temple worship. He's coming down the road from Jerusalem. He's leaving Jerusalem. And even in the Hebrew law, it required everybody, if a corpse was abandoned, to at least bury it. So over the years, people have proposed all sorts of reasons, but if we think about it, it's probably the reason that a lot of us don't stop to help. He had places to be. He didn't have the time. He had a schedule, and he had a schedule he had to keep. He had to get home. He had been at temple worship. He had done all the things. He had come on Sunday morning, checked the box, and he was headed to the restaurant. He did not have time to stop. There were people waiting for him, right? He had to get the cheese dip before the Baptists get there. He had to go somewhere. He had a schedule. He didn't have the time. And we're not sure what he had to do. We're not sure where he was going, but clearly he was going somewhere, and he sees this guy, and he makes this choice to pass by that moment. This guy who helps at the temple with sacrifices couldn't sacrifice a few moments to help someone in need. Don't worry, Jesus goes on with the story. So likewise, a Levite, a worship leader, comes down the same road. And when he came to that place, when he came close, he saw him, and he passed by on the other side. So again, he comes, he sees, he passes by. Same thing. We can come up with all sorts of reasons. We can come up with all sorts of thoughts of why this Levite, why this worship leader wouldn't stop and help this guy out. We don't know. Maybe, like worship leaders, maybe he had a hair appointment or something, like had to get just the right hair, or he's shopping for another black shirt. I don't know. Maybe it was like a tight jeans convention. Like, we don't know why the worship leader wouldn't stop and help out. But this worship leader goes on by. He sees the guy. He makes the decision. I've got too much to do. I've got too many places to be. I can hear the clock in my head. I don't have time to get involved. This guy who had time to prepare for worship, for the worship of God, but had no time to tend to the ones that God loved. And when I read this story, I want to be upset about these two guys. But just like them, I can easily talk myself out of helping out because I don't have the time. And like I tell my kids all the time, and I've told you before, you can make excuses or you can make a difference, but you can't do both. And I can come up with all sorts of excuses why I don't have the time to invest in others. I mean, you've experienced this, right? Many of you have been part of all sorts of different volunteer organizations. Many of you are teachers or have worked in the school systems. Many of you have asked people to volunteer in certain places in certain ways. Maybe it's at a sports team to help out coaching, to do something. You've asked all sorts of people to do all sorts of stuff. And what have they said? I don't have time. I don't have the time. The number one excuse, the number one reason, the number one thing that people say, the reason that they don't volunteer, I don't have the time. The priest and the Levite said the exact same thing about this man who was left half dead. Jesus goes on, but a Samaritan, to which the lawyer and all of the good Jewish audience was like, boo, nobody likes a Samaritan, right? A Samaritan was hated by the Jewish population. So Jesus immediately pokes them. Says a Samaritan comes along. And while he was traveling, clearly he's going somewhere, he came near to him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity or mercy. The Samaritan who was on his way somewhere, just like the priest and the Levite, you don't go on this road if you're just out for a stroll. It's a very dangerous road. So clearly he had places to go, people to see, things to do. A lot of people assume he was a merchant. He's coming down the road with certain things that he had gotten in Jerusalem, and he's headed to wherever he's going next, and he's got a trade appointment, and he's got to do all these things and get all this stuff done. But his story sounds a little different. He comes and he sees, and splagnatstomai, right? My favorite Greek word. And it should be your favorite Greek word too. Splagnatsomai, which literally means moved in the bowels. Doesn't that sound like caring? Moved in the bowels. Moved in his gut. Because in this day, the seat of love and affection was in the gut. He was moved with mercy and compassion. He had to get involved. He was gut-wrenched, which is a word that we use commonly. He saw this guy, and he really saw that he had a need. He had to get involved. Even though he had places to be, even though he had things to do, he had to get involved. He was moved so deeply that he had to do something. Which brings me to Bon Jovi. That's a good transition, right? I don't know how many of you saw this last week, but John Bon Jovi and his band are filming a music video in Nashville on this pedestrian bridge, spending millions of dollars a minute to get a music video made. And there's this lady who's on the edge of the bridge about to jump. And John Bon Jovi, with his beautiful flowing hair, doesn't pass by, but he stops and talks this lady off the edge of the bridge, costing millions of dollars a minute because he's got this whole film crew here. But he was moved. He saw this person, and he was moved. The Samaritan sees this man and values his life as important, and he spends the most important thing that he has with him. He spends time. He had places to go, he had things to do, but he's just like us. But he decided to invest his time in something that really mattered. So much so, the story goes on. Like he went to him and bandaged his wounds, and he poured oil and wine on them, some of these resources that he had procured. He'd spent his money on. And then he put him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. Look at this. The next day, he spent the night caring for this guy. The next day, he took out 2 denarii, 2 days' wages, and he gave them to the innkeeper, and he said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I'll repay you whatever more you spend on him." And Jesus asked, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" And he replied, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The guy invested time with this guy. He saw him and he was moved, and he spent time with him overnight. I mean, like, this is a lot of time. And look, I love this. You know, he's using his oil and his wine, but he's also given some money to the innkeeper, and he's going to take care of the expenses. Like, sometimes people ask me, you know, can I just give with my time? And I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. Because here's what I know is that once we invest our life, we invest the rest of our resources in what really matters. Where my gut goes, my wallet follows. Whether that's Waffle House or serving someone else. When I feel moved to invest my life, all of a sudden this becomes more important. When I give some of my time, I'm more apt to give out of my resources as well. It's a value thing. What's it worth? What's this person worth? Martin Luther King Jr. often preached this passage. He said there's a difference between the priest and the Levite and the Samaritan. And the difference is the question that each of them asked. The priest and the Levite asked this question: if I stop and help this man, what will it cost me? The Samaritan asked a different question: if I do not stop to help this man, what will it cost him? See, the Samaritan has nothing to gain, but everything to give. That's what giving your time really looks like. How you spend your time, how you spend that big block of time at the bottom, it matters for you. It matters for who you want to be, but it matters more for those around you, for those people that you bump into each and every day. Because as the famous quote from Dr. Anthony P. Witham says, our kids spell love Time, right? When parents give children the gift of their time, they're saying, I love you, I value you, you are the most important person to me in the world. And the reality is, this isn't just kids that feel that way. Each of us feels that way. And every opportunity that you have to serve is an opportunity to tell someone that they are loved. And you do that with your time. And the only thing more precious than our time is those that we spend it on. So as you think about how you give of your time, I want you to hear this. You guys do so good at this. Because I get to go to the schools, I get to see the classes, I get to hear the stories from community leaders about how much you're investing your lives in our community, and it's making a difference. We've gotten to know a friend in the Magnolia apartment community over the summer through our summer lunch program who happened to take our Parents First initiative class last semester. And now she's helping us to think about how it is that in that difficult apartment community, we can talk to them and say, hey, we haven't been very good neighbors. Can we be better neighbors? We'd like to do that. And we're going to do that by spending time with you. And this new friend is helping us to learn what that looks like. And we've got so many great opportunities for you to invest your time. I mean, this Saturday with the bed build, come and build beds for kids in our community who don't have beds. Like that's an easy one. Candy at the Cabins. We get to say to hundreds and hundreds of kids, we love you. We invested our time in this. And here's some sugar to prove it. And I don't know if you saw this a couple of weeks ago, but the Surgeon General of the United States of America said that the stress of parenting has become a public health emergency. And 4 different times during the week, we're investing in parents through Parents First initiative and seeing incredible results. Like we have over 60 people signed up for 4 different classes throughout the week, impacting around 150 kids in those families. And we need some more volunteers to spend time with the parents, serving meals, to spend time with the kids, just loving on them and playing with them, to spend time helping to tutor and to help them work through some homework. And we've seen how important parenting is in our communities. And we get to tell them that they are valued and loved. And we do that with our time. So here's the deal. Let's not pass by this moment. Don't just pass by. Go and do likewise. That's what Jesus tells the lawyer. Go and do likewise. We're going to be tempted, as soon as we sing the last song, we're going to go, okay, well, I would like to help out in some way. I'd like to do something. I'd like to do that, except, I've got this on my calendar. I got this on my calendar. I got this on my calendar. Don't let this moment pass you by. Go and do likewise. Because it tells everyone around you that they are worth it. Because Jesus told all of us that we're worth it.